After the Third Kiss by Bruce Coville. I looked at my brother with desperate longing. Please, I begged, just one more kiss. Wind shuddered and turned away toward the west and the setting sun. Horrified that I might lose my chance, I stretched the great length of my neck past his broad shoulder, then curled it back so I could catch and hold him with my amber eye. Please, wind, I hissed again. Once the sun goes down, I will be trapped this way forever. We have but minutes left. My heart was pounding with such fear that I thought I might die before the sun reached the horizon anyway. Wind had kissed me twice already, which really was more than you could ask of any man, given how hideous I was and how fierce the heat of my every breath. But underneath the scales, beyond the fangs, the fire, and the venom, I was still May Margaret, the sister he had left behind shortly after our mother's death, when he went out to conquer the world with his young man's sword and his young man's heart. Still the sister who had been left to deal with our father's new wife, who was the one who had cursed me into this loathsome shape. The agony of my transformation will be with me always. It pained my body, of course, for every bone had screamed in rebellion at the way it was forced to twist and stretch. Every inch of skin had felt the fire. Every secret inside part burned as though it were being bathed in acid. But the torment of my body had been nothing to the agony of my soul when I saw the long twisting coils of dragon shape that now encased me. That same despair pierced me yet again an hour later when the sight of me evoked piercing screams from Glenna, my lady-in-waiting, and yet again, every time I saw the fear and disgust that twisted the face of anyone who looked on me. And that was only the beginning, for less than a day after my change, I discovered that I had an appetite to match my size, and a hunger that ate at me as if a fire were burning within. Out I soared on newfound wings, and nothing that lived was safe, though I managed to restrict my feeding, usually, to sheep and cattle. How I was feared, how I was hated, how I ached inside each day as I wrapped myself around a spindle stone, the great shaft of rock on the cliffs above the sea, the rock that I had claimed as my perch. Or perhaps it had claimed me, for I felt a strange attraction to it. From here, I could watch inland to see if any came to attack. More importantly, I could gaze out over the western waters in the hope that I might spot my brother returning to free me from my curse. For my stepmother had made this much clear. The only way for me to regain my true shape was for child Wind of his own free will to kiss me 3 times before sunset on the day of his return. Wind did return at last. Later I learned that it was my own rampaging hunger that had brought him back, for when I had slain enough cattle, devoured enough sheep, word reached him across the sea that a dragon was devastating his homeland. So home he came, sword at the ready, never suspecting that the beast he came to slay was his own childhood playfellow, the younger sister he had promised to protect and defend forever. Oddly, by the time he arrived, the worst of my depredations were past. This was because an old wise woman named Nell had advised the desperate country folk that if they would set aside the milk of 7 cows to bring me both morning and evening, my ravenous hunger would be sated. So it was a fairly peaceful countryside to which Wind was returning, at least until the Queen herself became aware that he was on his way. Then her wrath was mighty indeed. I sensed her rage, indeed, who in the kingdom did not? It seemed to sizzle in the stones and curl the leaves of every tree. What I did not know at first was the cause of it, so I simply clung to my stony perch and watched. In time I saw a ship upon the horizon. I reared my head, feeling an odd uneasiness. It was as if I needed to go down to the water to keep the ship from landing, as if there were a compulsion on me to guard the kingdom. Before the urge became so strong that I must leave my stony perch, my stepmother sent an army of imps to raise a storm and turn the ship away. But my good brother was wiser than the Queen had anticipated. Suspecting witchery, Wind had, as I later learned, sheathed his ship in rowan wood, good proof against the Queen's dark art. It both delighted and troubled me to watch that screeching horde of imps dash themselves against the ship's hull, then tumble into the water, where they thrashed about, wailing for their mistress to protect them. Delighted me, because they were my stepmother's servants, and I hated her. Troubled me, because I had no idea yet who was on that ship, and this uncertainty intensified my compulsion to protect our shores. With the imps vanquished, the uneasiness I had felt when I first spotted the ship drove me to the water's edge. Once there, I found I had no choice but to attack the ship. Soaring out across the water, I coiled my long body around the vessel and tried to drag it under. My brain was on fire then. I had no control of myself, and still no knowledge of who was on board. But with the help of the rowan wood, Child Wind escaped my clutches and steered the ship out of sight. His oarsmen were strong, and before the Queen knew what was what, he had landed in the next bay. And here was a lovely thing. The moment my brother, the true heir to the crown of Arlesborough Castle, set foot ashore, the Queen's awesome power was broken. So when Wind approached me, sword drawn, ready to lop off my head, I was able to speak to him.